All right, I think we're ready to go. Okay, so you should see the Nearpod guys on your screen still, even though we're on Zoom. So make sure you're on Zoom because I think that's where I'm at right now. So what are these key themes of Judaism? And I want you to take these down in your notebook. The key ones are covenant. God has started a relationship with these people. The Israelites are God's chosen people. Another big one is remembrance. Okay, remembrance is key here too. You have to remember your relationship with God. The Shema prayer, we talked about that when you guys were freshmen, and it was in your reading too on page 2, or it's going to be on your, it was in your reading this over the weekend. The Shema prayer, hear, O Israel, remember that you have one God, and that God is the God of your life. That is the God of Israel. You need to love that God with all your heart, all your mind, all your strength. You got to remember, a key theme in the Bible, in the Old Testament, is remember what God has done for you. Remember what God has done for you, so that you don't forget and you don't go astray. Based on remembrance is number 3, observance and obedience. This is the law, right? This is why, Orthodox Jews in particular are very obedient to the law, right? You need to focus on following the commandments. You got to follow the dietary restrictions. You got to follow the purity restrictions. You got to follow all these laws, because that's the way to train yourself to be like God, to love like God, to keep the commandments is so important for the Jewish people. Another big theme here, guys, that we're going to see throughout is home and exile. The importance of the promised land versus the diaspora. Okay, the diaspora is the spreading out of all the peoples, of all the nations, whereas the promised land is the home. God has a home for these people. The importance of home for Jews, even to this day, right? There's Jewish people spread throughout the world now. They still long for that time they can all be in the promised land, the land of Canaan. In fact, by birthright, every Jew can take a free trip to Israel, to Jerusalem. So it's kind of cool. It's part of their faith. It's beautiful. And I've known people that have from high school and from college who have gotten to do it. You sign up and you can take a pilgrimage to Jerusalem for free, because it's your birthright to go there and walk where the patriarchs used to walk, to go to the holy places. Okay, so this idea of home versus exile. A lot of times in Jewish history, they get kicked out of home. The number 5 is the triumph of the underdog, David and Goliath. That's a huge theme we've already looked at. And of course, the big one there, number 6, monotheism. So we're going to do this quickly. I'm not going to have you guys take down all these notes for the sake of time. Please check out the Nearpod on your own time. Check out this YouTube video. It'll be much easier. And a lot of this is review from freshman year class, Old Testament with me. So we're going to go quickly. So just pay attention. Jot down things if you want to get them down quickly, but this will be a little bit quicker. So just pay attention. So we know that you can trace all 3 monotheistic faiths to Abraham. So Abraham had one son, Ishmael, that was not the child of the promise. And we believe through Ishmael, because he was kicked out of the family, comes Muhammad. And Muhammad was the founder of what faith? You can unmute yourself. Muhammad is the founder of what faith? Anybody? What religion?
Islam?
Islam. Very good. Muhammad is the founder of Islam. We'll talk about him next week. But then on the other side, his actual son, his son with Sarah, the actual child of the promise, is Isaac. This is important because Isaac, you get the patriarchs, and you get Joseph, then you get Moses, and you come all the way down through the family tree of David. You get to, obviously, you still have Judaism here in the blue, but then you also have Jesus. Jesus comes to the line of David. So, in a sense, Abraham is the founder of the 3 monotheistic faiths. It's kind of a cool thing to think about, right? That Abraham, this guy who couldn't have kids until he was 100 years old, this guy who couldn't have kids is literally, in some sense, the father of all people that are Christian, Jewish, and is a Muslim throughout the world. It's pretty amazing. A little timeline here, guys. You see the history going back here to 1800 BC. That's way long ago. What is that? Almost 4,000 years ago. That when you get the time of Abraham, this is the Judaism in blue. Christianity has a much shorter history in purple. Obviously with the coming of Jesus and start of the church, and Islam, a much shorter one, starting around the year 600 AD. So Islam is much shorter. So Judaism has been around for thousands and thousands of years, a long history. So now we're going to get really into the story of Israel. So again, like I said, you don't need to take down all the notes just for the sake of time. Check this video out later so you can get them if you need them. Okay, so the story of Israel. It's found in a lot of it's found in the Old Testament. Remember, Jews do not call it Old Testament. For them, it's their Bible. They don't have a New Testament, so they don't call it the Old Testament. They just call it their scriptures, their Bible. It's got the basic story of the formation of the chosen people, the Jewish people. The basic storyline, if you remember from freshman year, is creation, fall, redemption, right? That's our basic storyline, both Christianity and Judaism. So again, like I said, the rest of the creation and fall happened right at the beginning, and then the rest of it is this long process of redemption, God trying to save his people. For Jews, they still are waiting for the Messiah to come, the final Savior. They're still waiting for him to come. Christians, we believe that was Christ, and he already came and saved us. But for Jews today, they believe that they're still waiting for the Messiah. So it's pretty cool that literally this huge Bible is the story of redemption, this long process to save the people of Israel. As we begin, really important to note that we should be keeping in mind these important things of the Jews, these important themes of look at history. The folks today is why history is so important to the Jewish people. It's you can't overstate it, right? In other religions, time is circular, right? Time is circular. That means that things are repeating themselves, right? Like the seasons, time periods, the worlds, the universes, they just repeat themselves. Hinduism believes the universe recreates itself. Other religions believe that nature was kind of in its cycle and in event. There was no new events, right? Because things happened before. Your life had happened before. You had lived before, right? So it was just kind of like, okay, figure that out and try to end that cycle. Not so here with Judaism, right? History now is a line. It's going somewhere, right? It's a past, present, and it's going toward the future. So we get these ideas of like free will and vocation and future and history and progress and all these important themes and things we hear about all the time in our own life come from this linear view of history. So it's really important. But keep in mind these important things of Judaism, these important features as we look at history and see why history is so important to the Jewish people. So where does this all begin? The land of he's over here. Abraham, or Abram at the time, is called from this place over here. He's told to move, pack up all his stuff, go to Canaan, start a family there. Remember, he's really old, can't have kids. That's the promised land, right? So that's really important that we understand that's the promised land. He's told to pack all his stuff up. He makes a covenant with God, an agreement, a personal relationship with God. Says, and God gives him these promises. Okay, you're going to have a lot of kids. You're going to have a land for yourself. You're going to have a great nation. All these things seem kind of crazy to Abraham at first, but obviously God is going to see it through. The land is flowing with milk and honey. That's the term, right? That it has all these good things. If you can just get there, it has all these good things for you. He doesn't even tell him where it is. He just says, pack up your stuff and go. And Abram, this great model of faith, packs up his stuff and goes. And he has two sons, Isaac and Ishmael. The next period with Abraham and then with Isaac and Jacob are the period of the patriarch. Remember, this is found in the book of Genesis in the Torah. Again, that good covenant that God will keep his side of the promise. If the humans keep theirs, the humans obviously fail because they're sinners. Key ideas emerge in Genesis that the Jews are God's chosen people and that the promised land is their home. Okay. Jacob, the last of the patriarchs, has 12 sons. These sons become the 12 tribes of Israel. Remember, Jacob's name itself gets changed to Israel. So through Joseph, you remember the story of Joseph, remember he gets sold in slavery. He ends up in Egypt, and then his brothers come because he saves them from a famine. So the chosen people are now in Egypt. Now you got to remember the story, right? They're supposed to be in Canaan. They're supposed to be in the promised land. Egypt is not the promised land, so they're not in the right spot, and problems are going to come. But the key things to keep in mind here with these patriarchs, these fathers of Judaism, is that God is choosing these people, starting these covenant relationships with them, as long as they have faith and they stay true, and then the promises will come. Of course, the next great part of the story, once they're in Egypt, as you all know, is Moses and the Exodus. We don't really need to spend too much time on this. This is the key story for the Jewish people, the most important one, hands down. That's why the Passover is the most important feast celebration for Jewish people up until this day. it's the key story because it's God saving his people, excuse me, right? Moses is the greatest of all the Jewish prophets. He actually saw God face to face. He got the 10 Commandments. He's raised as a prince of Egypt. He's called on to free the Israelites. God sends these 10 plagues to kind of just, to kind of scare Pharaoh into releasing them. The Passover comes. Remember that day when the angel of death comes and he kills the firstborn sons of the Egyptians, but spares the Jewish children because they put blood of the lamb on the doorposts. Then they leave most parts of the Red Sea. The waters fall on the Egyptian soldiers. It's really the coolest story in the Bible, and it's really the most important story for the Jewish people. Look at, even though they were this small little group of slaves, God was on their side. God freed them. God gave them the miracles and the power to get out of there, and he defeated Egypt and the Pharaoh. This is really an important moment because now they're out of Egypt and they're heading back toward the Promised Land. Of course, this is also when they get the 10 Commandments. They make the covenant at Sinai, but of course, there's a lot of issues, and they wander in the desert for a really long time. Remember, they wander for 40 years. It takes them 40 years to go from Egypt or Mount Sinai all the way up until the Promised Land. Then we get Joshua as the next big leader. Then we have the cycle of judges. Remember this? People keep sinning, and then the judge will come to help them, and then they die, and then things get a little bit better. But then there's they sin some more, and they fall down again. So disobedience leads to affliction, leads to the emergence of a judge. Then it's a call to repentance. Then it's obedience to God. Then it's some prosperity. It's good, and then the judge dies, and it's back. The cycle starts. The time of the kings come after that. So after the judges come the kings. We have Saul, David, Solomon. David is the best Jewish king, even though he has his own problems. Saul was terrible, even though he's the first one. David sets up the temple at Jerusalem. That's where the capital city is. Really good move on his part. Solomon builds the temple and puts the Ark of the Covenant there, and the Levites are the priestly caste. So now that they've gone from a small nation now to the 12 tribes, and now they are a kingdom with Saul, David, and Solomon, about 1,000 years before Christ. Things go bad after this. Of course, we have Canaan splits into two after the death of Solomon because there's some problems with his sons. That weakens it. So we have Israel in the north and Judah in the south. You see the two kingdoms here because of the two sons of Solomon split it. That makes him weaker. Northern Israel is attacked by the Assyrians. Babylonians attack the south in 586 BC, so about 150 years later they attack, and then there's this thing called the Babylonian captivity. They're kicked out of the Holy Land, and they're in exile, right, for 50 years. This idea of exile comes throughout, right? They're kicked out of their home. They're kicked out of the Promised Land. And what's worse, in 586, the temple is destroyed. Remember, the temple is this house of God. It's the most important thing for the Jewish people, and it's destroyed. Now the diaspora begins, right? That we have a situation where Jews are not living in the Promised Land. They're actually setting up their homes throughout the world, really. And this happened ever since 586. They build another temple after this in 530s, as you saw in the video. But that gets destroyed by the Romans in 770 AD. We start to see this belief in the Messiah emerging, that there's going to be a king that will come to defeat all the enemies, right? They've had something like that before, like a king, but now they're even thinking of a Messiah. This guy's going to come, he's going to defeat the enemies. This is all happening after that, or during that time of the exile, when they're kicked out of Judah in the south, and when they're in Jerusalem, and when they come back. So the belief in the Messiah is emerging. Faithful Jews are continuing to follow the commandments, worship correctly, and they're trying their best to obey God's commandments no matter what. Like I said, remember, the temple is really important to understanding Judaism. It's the dwelling place of God. In the Holy of Holies is the Ark of the Covenant, is the 10 Commandments, and the presence of God. This is where the sacrifices were made. Only the whole high priest once a year could actually enter into the holiest of holies. There was all these different places for sacrifice and for prayer. Remember, this was destroyed in 586. The first one that was built by Solomon was destroyed in 586. And then after that, the second one was destroyed in 70 CE, so in the Common Era, by the Romans. After that, there was no more temple, right? Now that where the temple used to, in Rome, or in Jerusalem, I should say, the temple is a mosque now, okay? It's an Islamic mosque. It's not a Jewish temple. Now, most of the time, practices are done in synagogues and in homes, right? It's an emphasis on learning and studying and prayer as opposed to sacrifice. So with that destruction in the 70 AD by the Romans of the second temple, the second one getting destroyed, that kind of ended the sacrificial component of Judaism. So it's a really big turning point, a very sad turning point. You got to imagine all these things. What could be worse than having the temple be destroyed and then having it destroyed again, right? This is the house of God. That you can imagine what that would have been like for the Jewish people to live through. Again, we've already looked at the term diaspora, this idea that the Jews, after the beginning around the time of that exile in 586, and then in the centuries that follow, Jews lived not in the promised land. By the 3rd century before Christ, most Jews did not live in the promised land. They did not live in Israel or Jerusalem. They lived in other areas because that's just the way things had happened. Quickly, some last things about history here. Before, in the years leading up to Jesus, there are these revolts. There's the Maccabean revolt, which is a very famous one, about 160 years before Jesus comes. These people rise up and they try to defeat the different rulers. That's where we get Hanukkah from. You could look up that story for more. Then the Greeks come in rule over the Jewish people, and after the Greeks, then of course it's the Romans. That's when Jesus is walking around. Remember, the Romans are in charge of Israel. There's a Jewish revolt in 66 AD, which is a little after Jesus' death. The temple is destroyed as a result. The Romans destroy the temple in 70, as we already looked at. Now the survival depends on the Pharisees. Pharisees focus on maintaining the law, and rabbinic Judaism emerges. Like I just said, rabbi means Hebrew, or means teacher in Hebrew. So remember, it's not on sacrifice anymore. We can't go to the temple and sacrifice because the temple is now destroyed for the second time, and now the Romans control everything. So now the focus is on Pharisees and the law, and on these rabbis, these teachers going into synagogues, going to homes and teaching and kind of studying as opposed to sacrifice. So again, that's a quick little history of Israel. Remember, we had the prophets at this time period. They're the ones who are calling out to the people to say, hey, you got to remain faithful. You got to turn back to God. And they're the ones who say, God will provide a Messiah, a Savior. Okay? He will restore God's kingdom, the kingdom of David. Don't worry. You just got to keep faith.